Vas-y,
Allez,
refais
salut à
là.
tous et bienvenue sur InfoCatch. Allez, on est parti donc pour une nouvelle interview, comme quoi qu'avec Osvaldo, on ne se lâche plus du tout. Si vous le savez que Osvaldo est là, c'est parce que on va faire une interview en français et en anglais. J'ai l'honneur et le plaisir d'accueillir Osvaldo, qui sera le traducteur de cette vidéo. Ça va, Osvaldo, tranquille?
Ça va bien et toi?
Ça va, ça va. Et puis aujourd'hui, nous avons l'honneur et le privilège d'accueillir Simon. Hello Simon, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Alors, vous l'avez certainement peut-être vu du côté de la WWE, NXT UK, donc on va parler un petit peu de son parcours. Première question, très simple. Comment tu découvres le catch, toi, pour la première fois? Est-ce que c'est un peu l'histoire de tout le monde, à la télévision, on te le fait découvrir? Comment ça se passe pour toi, la toute première fois?
So, Simon, once again, thank you for having you here. I think it's going to be a great time for everybody.
Thank you for
So
asking.
we start with we start for the first question. How did you discover wrestling? Television, internet, magazines? Someone would just talk you about?
Yeah, so my first exposure to wrestling was when I was 7 years old. So this will be around 1992. My cousin, who's a year older than me, was a big wrestling fan, and my dad borrowed a video cassette of WrestleMania 8 because my cousin liked it so much that my dad thought that I'd enjoy it as well. And I don't think I'd ever really heard of wrestling up until that point. And I remember the very first match that I watched was the main event of the show, which was Hulk Hogan and Sid Justice. And I guess being 7 years old at the time, I was really engrossed with just the spectacle of it all and these larger than life, really colourful characters that had the audience in the palm of their hands. And it was just like another world, and it was something that I'd never had any sort of experience of or exposure to or anything like that. But as soon as I saw it, I was hooked, and I asked my dad to keep borrowing tapes from my cousin so I could see more and more of it and stuff. And I guess at the time, they had I guess it would have been like a Ritz video or a Blockbuster video at the top of the street, and you could go and you could rent VHSs, but they were, WWF early 90s VHSs. So I got into the habit of on a weekend, I'd go up and rent one of the, Royal Rumble 90 or, SummerSlam 91 or stuff like that. And then for 1 year for Christmas, I got SummerSlam 92 on VHS, which is obviously from Wembley in London. And I must have watched the video hundreds of times, and I just became addicted to it. Yeah, became addicted to it.
I had definitely had the same feelings when I discovered WrestleMania 9. It's exactly the same thing. That's why when you've been telling this, I've been smiling. Come on, it's exactly the same feeling that I had.
Yeah.
Alors, Simon nous dit que c'est son cousin qui est un peu plus grand que lui qui l'a initié au catch, entre guillemets, puisqu'il regardait à l'époque le show WrestleMania 8, et que ils ont vu un ring avec des gars en costume ou en couleur, et ils se sont demandé ce que c'était. Donc, par curiosité, Simon est resté et a apprécié le spectacle, a commencé à comprendre doucement les règles du catch et tout ça. Il dit aussi que c'est depuis cette soirée-là, qu'il a pu décrocher du catch et qu'il a commencé à regarder de plus en plus de shows, tout en faisant attention aux storylines. Comme il l'a dit, c'était Hulk Hogan qui catchait contre Sid Justice en 92. Je me souviens bien, WrestleMania 8, c'est 92, ouais. Et que depuis, qu'il ne s'est plus détaché du catch, son cousin et lui-même, et que ça s'est transformé en passion, tout simplement. Il avait l'âge de 7 ans.
Ok, ça marche. Et est-ce que justement, c'est le fait que tu as regardé la WWE à la télé qui t'a permis justement de passer le cap, donc en devenant fan de catch à catcheur, ou alors c'est avec un peu plus de réflexion et tout? Quel était pour toi l'élément déclencheur?
Pas des questions plus longues.
Non, mais elle est facile. Regarde, quel
Elle
était
est
pour toi
facile, bah oui,
l'élément
c'est toi qui
déclencheur
réponds.
quel était pour toi l'élément déclencheur qui t'a permis de devenir catcheur? C'est pour ça que.
Ah là c'est
Ah,
mieux. Allez. Je pense que tu vas un peu couper au montage celle-là, je vais la reformuler, d'accord?
il n'y a pas de souci.
Next question. What made you the thing that you've been from wrestling fan to wrestler, except of that example you just gave us?
So, even though I was only a kid, once I'd started to develop that sort of addiction for wrestling, I knew that I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do it as a job. I knew as soon as I saw it that that's something that I wanted to do with my life, but I had no idea how to get from there to there. And back then in the UK, there wasn't really a huge amount of information available on training schools and things like that. There used to be a couple of wrestling magazines in this country. One was called Power Slam, which ran for years, and it didn't really cover much British wrestling. There might have been like the odd page in there. But there was another one that came out called, I think it was called WOW at first, which is World of Wrestling. And they had like a little bit more British wrestling coverage in there. And then one day, one issue, they had a couple of pages with like addresses, like postal addresses, to like contact some of the British wrestling companies that were around at the time. So I remember sending off a letter to a bunch of these different companies, basically asking, like, how do I get into wrestling? And at this age, I'll have been about like 14, 15. And a few of the companies got back to me. A few of them just sent me like catalogs for like their merchandise and stuff like that. But the one promoter that got back to me was a promoter called Brian Dixon, who was a really famous promoter in England for All Star Wrestling. He asked if I would be happy enough to help for a show they had coming up at Leeds Town Hall, and Leeds is the city in England that I live. So I went and picked up some like bill posters from their box office at Leeds Town Hall and went around Leeds City Centre, like putting posters up. And then the night of the show, went down to the building and like helped the crew set the ring up. And a couple of the older guys like got me in the ring and did like a little bit with me, but I hadn't had any professional training at this point. I'd done like a little bit in the backyard with my cousin and stuff when I was a little bit younger. But then in January of 2001, I was just about to turn 16. There was an advertisement in the magazine for a school in Sheffield, which is only about 45 minutes drive from me. And they were opening up a wrestling school. There was a company in the UK called NWA UK Hammerlock, and this was like a northern branch of that company. So you had to be 16 to go train. And luckily for me, I was just about to turn 16. So I think about a week or so after I turned 16, I went down for the first time to the school. They didn't have a ring or anything like that. It was a martial arts centre. It was upstairs in a building called the 393 Club in Sheffield. And it was just mats on the floor. The trainer was a guy called Alan Johnson, who was like a lower level Hammerlock guy. And that was my first exposure to actually, the first like rung on the ladder, I guess, to actually starting to learn to be a wrestler.
And it's definitely not the same ring with wrestling and other martial arts. It's definitely not the same one.
No, I think I was expecting there to be a ring there for some reason. Like, I had no idea again. Like, I was so young and blind going into it that I had no idea what it would be like.
Exactly.
But you expect to walk in and you expect it to be like the performance center or something like that. And it's obviously, it's not. And they had a couple of crash mats. And yeah, for the most part, it was just like blue, like jigsaw mats on the floor.
Wow.
So yeah, it wasn't quite as what I was expecting, but I was just excited at that age to, start to learn to do the thing that I wanted to do for a job.
Of course. Alors, Simon nous a dit plein de choses. Je vais essayer de raccourcir parce que sinon, tu n'auras pas le temps de poser toutes les questions. Simon nous dit que ça s'est passé à deux moments de sa jeunesse. D'abord à l'âge de de 14 ans, puisqu'il a commencé à devenir un adolescent qui se construisait, et qu'au fur et à mesure, en étant curieux de demander s'il existait éventuellement une école de catch dans sa ville, dans son quartier, il habite à Sheffield à ce moment-là. Donc Sheffield, c'est une ville du centre de l'Angleterre. Et au fur et à mesure d'être curieux, de demander par curiosité, il est tombé sur une école justement qui avait ouvert il y a quelques temps de ça. Et au fur et à mesure, en fait, après avoir mis un pied dans cette école-là, il a tout simplement gravi doucement les échelons. Et c'est surtout sa curiosité qui a fait que il a enfin franchi le cap de catcheur. Mais c'est aussi également, il a réussi à poser dans un magazine à l'âge de 16 ans en 2001 ou 2002. Il a réussi à poser dans un magazine de fitness et c'est là où il a été remarqué pour son physique atypique. Et c'est ce qui fait qu'en fait, ça a fait la promotion de sa carrière, en fait. C'est pas là où sa carrière a vraiment commencé,
Oui, bien
mais
sûr.
quand on a
On
du
en
monde
parlera
qui
après.
regarde un physique, ouais, voilà, quand c'est du monde qui regarde un physique comme celui qu'il avait, ça attire tout de suite du monde. Et quand ils ont vu que c'était un catcheur apprenti,
C'est
on
un
va aller
peu
le voir,
comme
et c'est ce qu'il y a eu.
c'est un peu comme Schwarzenegger, il a commencé aussi
Exact,
dans le
exactement.
bodybuilding. Donc
Non,
voilà, c'est
c'est
ça.
ça, ouais.
Euh,
Culturisme, bodybuilding, c'est ça.
du coup, on sait très bien que les parents sont un peu réticents. C'était quoi, toi, la réaction de ta famille quand justement tu leur as annoncé que tu allais devenir catcheur? Est-ce qu'ils t'ont suivi là-dedans? Est-ce qu'ils étaient un petit peu réticents? C'est quoi un peu le retour que tu as eu du catch?
So, Simon, next question is about what your family thought about your wrestling career. When they know that you, Simon, will be a wrestling superstars, what did they do? Did they cheer you up? Maybe just say, "Hey, come on, wrestling is not this, and wrestling is not this." How your family did react to this?
They were always really supportive. It was actually because again I was only 16 when I started to train, so I didn't drive or anything like that. I couldn't drive, so it was actually my dad that took me down to the training school every week. So he'd drive me down there, and I think the training school sessions probably lasted about 3 hours. So he'd drive me down, and he'd pretty much wait outside the school, for like 3 hours. Like he'd get a paper and sit in the car and read the paper, or listen to like the football scores or something like that, or go get some food or something. But he knew like how much I wanted to do it as a job, and like they're both really supportive from day one. I'm not too sure sort of how viable they thought that being a wrestler would be, as far as like a living goes, as in like making a living from it. I had a part-time job at the time anyway, but I'm at that age where you don't really have to think about like long-term like future at that point. So I think it was probably a case of like, well, let's see, let's let him try it out and see how he does with it, and if he enjoys it and stuff. Because I tried other stuff like in the past when I was younger. Like I'd I was like quite a good football player at one point, and for a while I thought about like trying to like do something with that for like a career, because I had like some contacts with that. But I never sort of pursued it, and wrestling like took priority all the time. So no, they're really supportive. Like the first good few shows that I did when I debuted, like my dad was the one that drove me to the shows and stuff like that before I started traveling with like other wrestlers or on my own or anything like that. Like he would always take me to the shows. And one of the very first shows that I did, I was in like a rumble, and I got thrown out in like 8 seconds or something like that. And my dad drove me down to Hucknall, which is near Nottingham. So a couple of hours from Leeds. I think he took the afternoon off work, drove me down there to watch me get thrown out the ring in 8 seconds, and then drove me home. But he was always still like really supportive. Both of them were. So like it was obviously, not to skip too far ahead, but it was great. It was a big thing for me, like later on in years, for like my parents to be able to like come watch me wrestle, especially for like WWE and stuff like that. So, but no, since day one, they're always really supportive of it.
Ok. Simon nous dit que alors il a dit tellement de choses. parce que je vais essayer de me souvenir de tout. À tel point, j'ai oublié un peu la question.
La question, c'était justement, c'était quoi la réaction de sa famille?
Ouais, voilà, c'est ça. Donc en fait, au début, comme il le disait, sa famille a été d'abord, dans un premier temps, un peu, c'est-à-dire de dire, un peu circonspect. Tu es sûr que c'est vraiment ce que tu veux faire, tout ça.
Comme
Mais
beaucoup de
il n'y a que
monde.
son père qui a pu. Ouais, ouais, comme beaucoup de monde. Mais c'est que son père qui a justement vu l'intérêt du catch chez Simon et qui a continué de l'encourager puisqu'il a vu que ça le plaisait vraiment. Et donc, au fur et à mesure, c'était fais attention, c'est dangereux, c'est pas un sport développé, puis tu peux avoir de graves blessures, tout ça, tout ça. Mais et c'est vraiment son père qui a repéré cette passion chez lui, qui a continué de l'inculquer. C'est même lui qui l'a amené à plusieurs shows.
Ok, ouais.
Donc voilà, il y a peut-être des heures de route, des heures de. Par contre, comme il l'a dit, c'était la plupart du temps, c'était des voyages en voiture et pas en avion. Donc, comme je disais tout à l'heure, il était sur Sheffield, donc il devait sûrement aller à Manchester au nord-ouest ou à
Ouais.
Londres au sud-est, et ainsi de suite. Donc c'est vrai que c'est vraiment pas uniquement le papa qui a contribué à ça, mais c'est vraiment lui qui s'est penché sur cette passion. Et je pense que s'il en est là, c'est aussi grâce à lui.
Alors, si mes infos sont bons, normalement, tu commences ta carrière, toi, en 2008 à la NOAH. Est-ce que tu vas directement à la NOAH en 2008 ou est-ce que tu es dans les circuits indépendants? Si tu peux juste un peu nous en parler. Et pareil, si tu commences à la NOAH, comment ça se passe là-bas?
Okay, so your wrestling career officially started in 2008, right? It was
No.
at the maybe
Non, non.
no.
Ah bah, tu vois.
Okay,
Tu vois,
okay,
regarde,
so
c'était pas bon. Non, mais il y a pas de problème.
2001.
no problem.
2002, sorry.
What?
2002.
2002. Yeah,
Yeah.
but the question was okay. Sorry,
It's okay.
it's our bad.
Yes, that's
But
fine.
you started you started in the Noah Pro Wrestling.
I think you've gone off Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly. But that's why it's
Yeah.
better. It's better now to have you here because you're the best person to talk about your wrestling career.
Yes, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, no. 2002 was when I
Okay.
started. That was
Okay.
my first match was in 2002.
Okay. So when did you? Well, just talk about how your wrestling career started,
Okay.
when it was, where it was, and then just if I just have maybe one thing, can you just get this because I have to remember all of you say and I have to translate all of you say.
Yeah.
So maybe the first question is when and where your wrestling career started,
Okay.
and it was in which structure.
Okay. So I started training in January of 2001, and my first official match was in February of 2002 in Sheffield. We had a show in the same building where the wrestling school was. Downstairs was like a hall, and they got a ring and they had a show. And I wrestled a guy called Dan DeSoto and lost the match in 90 seconds. I had no mask or anything like that. I wrestled under my real name because I didn't have any real idea of a character or anything by that point. Creativity has never really been like a big strong point of mine. Like I wasn't able to really come up with much of a character, but at the time I was a big fan of ECW. Like when I was a teenager, I got into ECW quite a lot, and I saw guys
I
like
am fan of ECW too. I am.
so I saw guys like Spike Dudley, who were
Yes.
like small guys. And at the training school, I was like the smallest guy there. Like I was always
Okay.
the one that like the bigger guys would like practice moves on and stuff like that. So I guess like I envisaged myself as like the company where I started out as like their version of Spike Dudley. So like I wrestled under my real name and I didn't have like professional gear or anything like that. And for the first 4 or 5 matches, I just wrestled as me.
Okay.
But I didn't look like a wrestler. I didn't, have a tan. I didn't have like proper gear. I didn't, like have. I didn't go to the gym. Well, I maybe went to the gym.
Protection and everything.
Skinny, pale kid, basically. So I needed.
You've just been starting, so I think it could be normal that you have not all the gear, but to start a match, it's really, really good, really, really good. Can I just translate, just you say, and then. Alors, Simon nous dit que il a été sur le circuit il a commencé à s'entraîner en janvier 2001.
D'accord. Tu vois, comme quoi que Wikipédia, ça c'est pas forcément bon. Et on frappera celui qui a mis de la merde sur Wikipédia.
C'est justement ce que Simon m'a dit. Il m'a dit, vous avez des informations de Wikipédia? J'ai dit oui, et c'est là où je lui dis justement, donc elles sont forcément fausses. Et c'est justement bien d'avoir Simon là maintenant pour pouvoir en parler, puisque qui mieux que lui peut nous parler de sa carrière. Donc il s'est entraîné pendant un an, à peu près un an, donc janvier 2001. Puis il a commencé en février 2002. Donc son entraînement a duré un an, ce qui est quand même pas trop mal, puisque enfin voilà, tout le monde sait que pour être bon sur le ring, il faut minimum 2 ou 3 ans. Donc ça veut dire qu'il a eu encore un talent quand même assez précoce. Mais comme il le dit lui-même, il n'avait pas beaucoup de physique, ni d'équipement. Donc ça fait qu'il n'avait pas de genouillère, il n'avait pas tout ça. Puis après, en fait, il n'avait pas de gimmick. Donc en fait, c'était vraiment plus ou moins, on l'a jeté dans le bain, puis après, débrouille-toi. En fait, ça a été un petit peu ça. Mais il a réussi à se trouver, à se découvrir dans tout ça. Et voilà pourquoi, en fait, il a fait son physique, puisqu'il porte un masque, il me semble, son équipement, tout ça. Mais voilà, il a fallu passer par cette transition d'entraînement à être sur le ring.
Tu vas me détester, Osvaldo.
Attends, c'est pas fini.
Vas-y.
Voilà, moi, comme il parle assez vite, donc je lui ai demandé de couper pour pouvoir traduire la suite. Donc là, on s'est arrêté. OK, so the match in February 2002, and then it was just after this.
So after a few matches, and just having no character, I wanted something to change. And at the time, being like a 16-year-old kid or a 17-year-old kid, I used to be very shy. So I wasn't very comfortable with interacting with an audience. I was a very insular person anyway. I didn't have a lot of confidence, had quite low self-esteem. And I didn't have the sort of courage and the confidence to interact with an audience. So the idea came up mutually between myself and the guy that trained me to maybe wrestle under a mask. And around that time, Rey Mysterio had started with WWE. So I guess part of the idea was to kind of latch on to that popularity, but also it was something for me to grow my own confidence. So my thinking was that if I go out there and I have this a mask on, then I almost have a barrier between me being shy,
being shy and everything, and the crowd,
audience, right? And it was only meant to be a temporary thing. It wasn't meant to be a long-term thing or anything like that. I figured I'll do it for a few months or a few shows or whatever. And then once I get more comfortable and once I get more confident, then I'll think of something else. I'll think of a new character or something like that. And it just stuck. It just ended up being what I did for the rest of my career. I think some of it was because it made me stand out from everyone else. It made me different to everyone else on the show because there wasn't really many other masked wrestlers back then in the UK. And it was something that I started embracing. It was something that you could put on a poster, I guess. After I'd been at the wrestling school for about a year, me and a bunch of others started to get quite frustrated because the school that we trained at, we were told that we could only wrestle on shows for that company and not go anywhere else.
Okay.
Good.
For the exclusivity of one of a structure, right?
What's that again? Sorry.
It was just exclusivity of one structure.
Yeah.
And nowhere else.
the trainer didn't want you to go anywhere else. He wanted his guys to stay on his shows, and that was it. But he was only running 6 shows a year, 7 shows a year, and there's only so many spots on the show. So like the first year that I wrestled, I think I wrestled like 4 matches, maybe 5 at the most. So you're not learning, because there's only so much you can learn in a training school. You know, to learn, you need to be out in front of a live audience, and the opportunity to do that on a regular basis wasn't there, because we were, you know, restricted to only working for this one company. So me and a bunch of others decided to break away from that training school and start trying to get our name out there around the country. And again, I had no idea how that worked. I didn't know where you would start, but I started to go to a couple of shows. And in 2003, I met a guy called Spud, who became now Drake Maverick in WWE.
Oh, okay.
And I became friends with him and a couple of others, and they were in the state. They were still starting out in their career, but they were traveling around the country and wrestling for different companies. So I gave him, Spud, and a couple of others a tape, a VHS tape, and asked them if they would hand the tape to some other promoters so they could have a look at my work and see if there was an opportunity somewhere for, you know, maybe a couple of shows with them. And a couple of promoters got in touch, and then you start networking and meeting other people. And, you know, after a couple of years, I'd started to actually start traveling around a lot more and getting to know more and more people. And you start getting more and more reps in, and eventually you gradually build, you know, start building a bit of a name for yourself.
Okay.
But that was, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try to translate everything you said, but I think I can do it.
That's fine, no problem.
Simon nous dit, donc on reprend la question là où elle s'est arrêtée. Simon nous dit que il a eu un grand problème entre guillemets à monter sur le ring, pas parce qu'il était pas à l'aise sur le ring, mais parce que c'était quelqu'un de très timide. Et honnêtement, quand on le regarde, ben,
on dirait pas. Oui, bien sûr.
On le dirait pas du tout, c'est ça. Et en fait, il a pensé à un truc. Ben, pourquoi ne pas catcher en portant un masque? Qui fait justement qu'en portant ce masque, en fait,
comme Rey Mysterio à peu près.
Ouais, plus ou moins. Après, je sais pas si Rey Mysterio a catché avec un masque pour cette raison-là. Après,
non, je crois que c'est parce que c'est leur religion ou un truc
voilà,
comme ça.
Ouais, c'est la religion.
Comme il est mexicain et tout. Ouais.
Exact. Donc, je pense pas que ce soit la même raison. Mais Simon, en portant ce masque, a vraiment fait sauter les barrières. Donc, il s'est retrouvé mais vraiment beaucoup plus à l'aise sur le ring, plus aussi timide à parler au public, à parler à son adversaire, à parler à tout le monde. Et honnêtement, c'est un conseil qui donne à beaucoup de catcheurs de penser éventuellement à ça si jamais ils cherchent un gimmick ou si jamais ils cherchent à briser la timidité. Comme pour lui, ça a marché, ça peut marcher pour n'importe qui. Et comme il l'a dit, en fait, ça a été quelque chose de bien, mais dans la structure où il était, c'était quelque chose qui était... en fait, comme il l'a dit, il n'avait que 6 shows par an. Donc, qui est quand même relativement pas beaucoup pour une structure. Et c'est là où, justement, comme il le dit, Simon est tombé sur Drake Maverick à l'époque, donc il y a peut-être 20 ans de ça, 2003 ou 2004, il me semble. Et justement, il avait demandé, Drake Maverick lui a demandé d'enregistrer ses matchs pour espérer pouvoir être repéré ailleurs. C'est ce qu'il y a eu dans une autre structure en Angleterre. Et je pense que ça a sûrement dû contribuer à ce que sa carrière grimpe. Just a little question, Simon. Are you still wearing a mask when you're a wrestler?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Ben voilà, donc comme il le dit maintenant, même maintenant après toutes ces années, je pense que maintenant il est plus du tout timide comme avant. Il continue quand même à porter ce masque pendant ses matchs.
Ok. Du coup, c'est bien en 2008 que tu vas à la NOAH ou alors l'information est vraiment mauvaise? Non, mais je préfère demander, on ne sait jamais.
T'as raison. Non, t'as raison. So about Wikipedia's information, was it in 2008 that you started in NOAH? Maybe before, maybe after that year?
So again, going off
Louis.
I wrestled for Pro Wrestling Noah, but it was on their UK tour. So I'd been wrestling for about 6 years at this point, and I'd built like a decent enough name for myself at this stage. And Mark Sloan, who was in charge of a company called, there was a company in the UK called the FWA, and he was in charge of their academy down at the bottom of the country in Portsmouth, and he had some contacts with Pro Wrestling Noah, and he was bringing or helping bring Pro Wrestling Noah over to the UK to do a couple of shows. One was at the Coventry Sky Dome, and one was a smaller building down there. I think it was like Farringdon or something like that on the next day, like a much smaller show. But on the Coventry Sky Dome show, which was a big deal, he asked me and a handful of others if we'd be interested in wrestling a pre-show match for the company.
Okay.
So we wrestled a 6-man tag match. Myself, a wrestler called Bubblegum, and a wrestler called Luke Phoenix wrestled Dave Mastiff, Zack Sabre Jr., and Mark Haskins. And we had to get to the building super early in the morning to set everything up, to set the ring up, to set the stage up, to set, the arena up. And then we opened the show in like a pre-show bonus match. But it was really, really well received. I think it won like a couple of little like Match of the Year awards in the UK, not like a couple of like websites. And the next day, myself and Bubblegum teamed with Mohamed Yone and wrestled Yune Akiyama and a couple of the other Pro Wrestling Noah guys whose names I forget at the moment. But it wasn't like I went over to Japan and toured with Noah or anything like that.
Yeah.
They were UK based shows. So yeah. So there you go.
So have you been wrestling in Noah in Japan or exclusively in
just
UK?
The UK, just the UK.
Just in UK. Ok. Alors Simon nous dit que oui, en effet, il a commencé en 2 minutes à la Noah, mais en fait, ouais, en fait, comme Simon le dit, Noah c'est une structure japonaise, mais Simon lui n'a catché qu'au Royaume-Uni.
Okay.
Voilà pourquoi en fait, quand la Noah elle a dû faire peut-être quelques shows au Royaume-Uni. Voilà pourquoi en fait il a fait le pré-show dans un match à 3 contre 3, donc un match à 6. Et c'est pour ça qu'en fait il a dit oui, Simon nous a dit tout à l'heure, oui, c'est une info de Wikipédia parce que voilà, il sait quand même ce qu'il a fait avec qui. Et c'était justement un des rares shows où la Noah s'est déplacée au Royaume-Uni. Et comme je viens de lui poser la question, vu que la Noah est une structure japonaise, a-t-il catché au Japon? Et il m'a répondu que non. Donc, il était présent pendant que la Noah organisait ses shows au Royaume-Uni, mais il ne refusait pas les propositions éventuelles d'autres structures. Donc oui, l'information est vraie, mais elle est aussi pas complètement fausse. Pas complètement fausse non plus.
Ok. Tu vas me détester, je suis désolé Osvaldo, on va commencer avec les questions dures, je suis désolé. Avec du recul, pour toi, qu'est-ce qui est compliqué en étant catcheur et le fait que tu portes un masque, est-ce que c'est aussi compliqué au niveau du champ visuel?
Là, tu vois, je te déteste moins parce que c'est une question très intelligente, tu vois. Je crois que c'est même la première fois que tu la poses, celle-là, parce que je me suis jamais posé la question de catcher avec un masque et tout, qu'est-ce que ça fait?
Bah, tu vois, regarde.
Non, franchement, ouais, bravo. So, Simon, about your, what you think about 2 things. The first is, what is really, really hard to being wrestling, even if it is physically, with mentality, with stamina, with everything. And then the second question, wrestling with a mask. Is it so hard? Is it easy? Can you just see everything around you? Your steps in the ring, your opponents, everything. It's a question that I think it's the first time that Dylan just asked a question, this kind of question to a wrestler.
Okay, so first of all, regarding the mask part, if I answer that one first, so
no problem.
The biggest thing. The biggest challenge, I guess, with wrestling in a mask is you are essentially taking away from you the number one thing you have to communicate with an audience, which is, your facial expressions. You can tell a lot by what someone is thinking or feeling, non-verbally through the facial expression, so the eyes and the mouth, and you're essentially removing that from the audience. So the hardest aspect is to learn how to invoke a reaction from an audience without the ability to use your facial expressions. So a lot of it has to come through body language instead. And there was a couple of people that were real big inspirations as far as that goes. And one was El Generico, who I wrestled a few times, and the other was Shawn Michaels. And El Generico was like a living cartoon character. The way that he moved in the ring, he was so talented at conveying his emotions and how he felt through action, through body language. And then Shawn Michaels, in my opinion, is probably the greatest seller in the history of the business. So like watching him and how he sells using his hands and things like that to convey pain all helps me learn how to interact with an audience. For the first few years, my mask that I had the eyes covered up, so you couldn't see my eyes. A few years into my career, I removed like the covering so you could now see my eyes. And then throughout my career, the mask, which started out as a full facial hood, started to have like bits like come away so you could see a bit more of the eyes and a bit more of the mouth and stuff like that. And that was to help engage with an audience, because it's crucial to, and whether you're a heel or a baby face, the audience needs to feel how you're feeling in order to become engaged in the story that you're trying to tell in the match. And you're going to struggle to do that if you don't have either a facial expression or body language that convey the same thing.
Exactly.
Do you want me to answer the first part now, or do you want to translate first? Or
I have to translate first.
That's fine. No problem.
If you don't mind.
That's fine. No problem.
Alors, Simon nous dit, et on a posé la question d'abord, qu'est-ce qui est dur en tant que catcheur, puis on a parlé du masque. Il a d'abord répondu à la question sur le masque. En fait, comme il le dit, c'est compliqué en étant facile à la fois. Alors, je vais développer un peu la question, parce que c'est vrai que quand c'est comme ça, c'est dit un peu, on peut se demander qu'est-ce que ça veut dire. Si on choisit de porter un masque en catchant, il y a peut-être le facial, le faciès, qui est, puisque, vu que la personne couvre son visage avec un masque, on ne peut pas vraiment voir les expressions du visage. Voilà pourquoi, en fait, comme Simon le dit, il faut développer tout ce qui est gestuel du corps. Il a pris l'exemple de Chris Jericho au début de sa carrière, qui catch avec un masque. Puis après, le contraire de cette idée, donc c'est Shawn Michaels. Comme il vient de le dire, Shawn Michaels est l'un des
Ouais, c'est bon, tu es là.
Hop, pardon, excuse-moi, c'est parce que j'ai reçu.
Non, c'est pas grave.
Non, j'ai reçu un appel entre-temps, donc j'ai coupé.
C'est pas grave.
Donc je disais, voilà.
Tu parlais de Shawn Michaels, ouais.
C'est ça. Donc c'est Shawn Michaels qui est l'un des meilleurs sellers, que ce soit sur le ring et en dehors, parce qu'il pouvait même faire comprendre à la personne qui est tout en haut de l'aréna ce qui se passait. Donc avec sa gestuelle, avec le fait de prendre une prise, avec le fait d'encaisser une prise. Et comme Simon nous le dit, si un catcheur décide de porter un masque, il faut apprendre à développer toute cette gestuelle qui complète le fait que un catcheur masqué ne peut pas montrer les émotions qu'il y a sur son visage. Et il dit aussi que dans un sens, si on n'a pas comment je peux dire, parce que le masque peut bouger à certains moments du match. Donc,
avec la sueur et tout, ouais, bien sûr. Oui.
Donc, voilà pourquoi, en fait, Simon conseille à tous ceux qui portent un masque de d'abord ne pas mettre le masque à même le visage. D'abord, d'essayer de trouver, quelque chose qui fait que déjà, ça enveloppe tout le visage. Et pour pas que le masque rippe, justement. Donc, avec cette couche supplémentaire entre le visage et le masque, ça peut faire éventuellement que le masque ne bouge pas en occultant les yeux ou en empêchant de respirer ou en faisant des des trucs comme ça. Donc là, c'est vrai que comme je t'ai dit, c'est une question très, 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 très pertinente que tu as posée. Et on a une réponse encore plus pertinente. So, Simon, going back for the answer of the second question, if you can.
So, I think that the hardest part of wrestling is without a doubt the psychological or the mental aspect of it. Obviously, to learn how to do like the physical part and whatnot, obviously takes time, and it takes time to get good at it and stuff like that. And then learning the psychology of wrestling and how to tell a story. Essentially, what you're doing is learning how to manipulate a large audience and their feelings. You have to be able to control an audience and how they feel. It's simple as that. You can, there's only so much that I was always a big fan of trying to tell stories. So there's only so much that high spots can get you as far as an emotional investment goes. And I always wanted to be able to learn to tell stories, to take the audience on an emotional journey. And you can only do that if you learn how to dictate their emotions. But as far as actually right, as far as actually being a wrestler goes, the hardest part is the mental toll that it takes on you, because aside from the fact that there's a lot of traveling involved, there's a lot of time that you spend on your own. There's a lot of time in whether it's driving through the night or whether it's in airports or being in foreign countries where you don't know anyone and you just sat, backstage or whatnot. But as well as that, there is a lot of anyone that gets into wrestling, I feel, or is trying to battle some sort of insecurity in themselves, because I don't think that you would get into a profession where you basically pretend to be somebody else a lot of the time, unless you're trying to get away from something. So that's a very big element of it, and it gets very, very easy to get lost inside that bubble of pretending to be somebody else. But there's also a lot of disappointments in wrestling. There's a lot of false dawns, and there can be a lot of jealousy of, well, why don't I have the spot that they have? Or there are a lot of people that will only be in contact with you if they feel that you can benefit them somehow. And it's very, very hard because everyone from wrestling comes from different walks of life and stuff like that. Our only connection originally is through wrestling. So it becomes hard to sort of know who you can put stock into, and it becomes hard to know sort of how much you can trust one person and stuff like that. So it can be very, very mentally draining. And I think that it's important for wrestlers to have something away from wrestling, so they've got a balance in their life, because if all your life is just wrestling, it gets very, very easy to get lost in that bubble of the mental toll that it takes on you. So it's very, very draining on you mentally.
Completely done with it. Really, I think you got one of the best answers in that kind of question. Really, I mean it. Alors, Simon nous dit tout simplement. Alors, c'est simple il faut vraiment être profond pour comprendre ça, parce qu'il a utilisé des mots très, très spéciaux en anglais. Je vais essayer de prendre les traductions les plus ressemblantes à ce que Simon nous a dit. Comme Simon nous le dit, en fait, la chose la plus dure dans le catch, et là, c'est pour ça que au fur et à mesure qu'il parlait, je disais oui de la tête, parce que c'est vraiment vrai. Ça.
Toi, en plus, t'es aussi dans le domaine, donc du coup, tu dois...
Et même en même temps, ce genre de questions, ça me fait rappeler un principe que j'ai tendance à oublier un petit peu par la force des choses et par le temps que je passe, tout ça. Donc c'est pour ça que, comme je viens de dire à Simon, c'est une des réponses les plus pertinentes. Le plus dur, c'est d'apprendre la psychologie du catch dans un premier temps. Donc, parce que tout le monde peut se faire un physique. Tout le monde peut venir de n'importe où, de n'importe quel sport, passer du temps à la salle, prendre des médicaments, des machins, pour espérer se faire un physique. Mais si, à partir du moment où on ne comprend pas la psychologie du catch, on va dire, c'est inutile. Comme Simon l'a dit il y a quelques minutes, si on veut aimer, si on comprend le catch, on ne l'aimera pas. Si on aime le catch, on le comprendra. Je sais pas ce qui se passe, peut-être un truc de poète ou je sais pas quoi, mais c'est vrai que c'est vrai en fait.
Non, mais c'est vrai, oui, non, mais bien sûr.
Ça, hein. Voilà,
Ouais.
donc on peut venir de n'importe quel sport, vouloir se faire un physique sur ci, sur ça, si on ne comprend pas la psychologie du catch, le fait de pouvoir mettre en avant le fait qu'il y ait un heel, qu'il y ait un face, et pas seulement qu'il se fout sur la gueule, c'est qu'il y a une histoire et des émotions une histoire à raconter et des émotions à faire passer au public. Un show de catch et même le catch en lui-même perd tout son charme. C'est ce que Simon nous dit. Et donc ça, c'est la chose la plus importante et la plus dure pour pouvoir faire tout simplement la psychologie du catch. Et comme il le dit, être solide mentalement. Parce que même en maîtrisant ça, on peut ne pas supporter le fait de devoir s'exiler à gauche, à droite pour tel show, devoir quitter sa famille, ses amis ou autre. En fait, voilà, tout ce qui est la distance avec tous les problèmes que tous les problèmes que le catch peut occasionner par rapport à la
Oui.
distance, le fait de prendre l'avion, la voiture, le train, se séparer de ses amis, tout ça. Et
hier, on a eu Ariel et tout, hein, la fille de Roddy
Ariel,
Piper.
c'est ça. Et c'est vrai qu'elle nous a dit la même chose. Bon, elle, après, c'est vrai qu'elle était très, très accompagnée par son papa. Mais voilà, c'est pas tout le monde qui a cette chance. Et c'est vrai que comme Simon le dit, il a connu certaines personnes qui n'ont pas pu supporter ça et qui ont dû mettre un terme à leur carrière, puisque ça a devenu, au fur et à mesure du temps qui passait, beaucoup, beaucoup trop dur à supporter.
Okay. Alors,
donc,
encore
voilà
encore une info Wikipédia. Donc, normalement, après, alors de 2011 à 2016, tu vas
j'ai des problèmes.
tu vas
Il risque encore de se fâcher.
Tu as la PCW, c'est comme ça que ça s'appelle. Et apparemment, là-bas, alors le seul nom que j'ai retenu, que tu as affronté là-bas, c'est Akira Tozawa. Pourquoi je parle de lui? Parce que c'est vrai qu'à la WWE, Akira Tozawa, on le voit un peu comme un espèce donc de clown, mais on oublie que franchement, tu vois, c'est un très bon catcheur. Alors du coup, je voulais savoir. Je voulais savoir aussi si vous pouvez nous parler un petit peu donc du talent de Akira Tozawa sur le ring.
Alors, est-ce que tu peux juste rappeler la date et la structure
alors, du coup, c'est la PCW de 2011 à 2016.
2016, ok.
Si c'est bien ça, hashtag Wikipédia.
Voilà pourquoi je vais quand même préciser, parce que... So, Simon, next question is about... It's not me, it's not Dylan, it's Wikipedia, once again.
Okay.
That's why I just want you to answer that question, because you're the best person to answer of your career question. Beyond 2011 to 2016, you've been at a structure called PCW, right?
Yep. Oh, he's gone.
Ah, il y a eu un problème, il va revenir. Hop.
There we go.
Ouais, c'est bon.
Yeah,
c'est bon.
Just someone called me that reject. During those 5 years, you've been facing, or maybe you met Akira Tozawa.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just talk about him? How did you met him? And then, because in WWE, maybe they just show him as not a good wrestler as he can be.
Yeah.
So how did you meet him and everything? So about Akira Tozawa.
Right. So I had what I would feel were my two big breakout matches in my career. I feel two big matches that helped like elevate my career to the next step. Number one was in 2006 for 1PW, and I wrestled El Generico, and the match went on YouTube.
Oh.
And for years, that was the match that people would tell me, that's, the first time I saw you wrestle, or promoters would get in touch and say, that was one of the reasons why we decided to book you, because of that match. And then in 2011, by this point, I was wrestling all over the country. It was my full-time job. and I was wrestling hundreds of times a year. And a company called PCW started in 2011. And the first couple of shows weren't great. They were okay, but it was in a nightclub, and it felt like the wrestling was a bit of a side attraction before people would go out on a night out in Preston. And there just happened to be some wrestling in the background before they went out. But then as the company started to grow, the fan base started to grow, and the fan base started to learn who the British wrestlers were, and they started to get more and more into the characters. And PCW was one of the companies that kind of started the boom in this country in 2012 onwards, 2013 onwards. And in 2012, PCW announced me versus Akira Tozawa, who at the time was one of Dragon Gate's top guys. And we were the main event of the show. And so I actually ended up getting quite a bad concussion about 3 or 4 minutes into the match. And I think the match is about 20, 25 minutes. So I remember coming backstage from that match, not really being able to remember a lot of it, but I remember the crowd were really good for it. And I remember sitting on a chair backstage with a towel around me, and a ton of the roster came up to me to tell me how much they'd enjoyed the match. And I didn't really realize until a day or two later that there was like a really big buzz coming out about the match. And again, at the time, during the match itself, I knew that the crowd were there for it, and I knew they were good for it, but because I had a concussion, I couldn't really, absorb a lot of it. And it became a match that a lot of people knew before, because it was regarded as very high quality. And he was, fantastic to work with. He was an incredible talent. He was very giving, as in, he was the star, he was the import. He could have just come over and just done his stuff, and got himself over, and not me. But he was very giving, and he was just as concerned about me getting over as much as he was. It won British Match of the Year that year, and for a good few years afterwards, that was the match that people would come up to me and say, that was the match that made me like a fan of yours, or that was the match that turned me on to British wrestling, or something to to that extent. We were meant to have a rematch at some point, but for some reason it just never happened. Like the PCW and Tozawa just couldn't ever sync up the dates or anything like that. But PCW was a company that gave me a lot of opportunities and a lot of memories. Wrestling Tozawa and the Young Bucks and Adam Cole and Tommaso Ciampa and a bunch of other guys. But it was that match with Tozawa that was like the thing that put like my career from there to like the next level up.
The next level, ok. Yeah. Simon nous dit que il a eu à la PCW, il a affronté Akira Tozawa, c'est sur la plus grande partie de la réponse qu'il vient de donner, mais comme il le dit, il a eu 2 matchs parmi les matchs les plus importants qui a propulsé sa carrière comme ça l'a été. Il dit qu'en 2012, il a affronté El Generico, donc c'est Sami Zayn.
Sami Zayn, ouais.
Avec un masque en plus, il me semble. Hein,
oui, c'est ça. Ouais, c'est à cette époque-là qui s'appelait El Generico. Ouais.
C'est ça, El Generico, ouais, voilà. Donc il a affronté Sami Zayn à cette époque-là. Donc c'était catcheur masqué versus catcheur masqué. Et voilà, ça a été. Comme il a dit, il me semble il doit avoir sur YouTube le lien du match ou quelque chose comme ça.
Ok, bah on essaiera de le mettre dans la description. Ouais.
Il y a peut-être des chances qu'on puisse le retrouver, mais voilà, Simon n'est pas sûr, donc on va quand même essayer de chercher, et puis on verra bien on verra bien sur quoi on tombera. Donc il a dit le premier match qu'il a vraiment fait passer qu'il a fait passer un cap, c'était ce match-là contre El Generico à la PCW en 2012. Il a eu aussi d'autres matchs avec Tommaso Ciampa, Drake Maverick aussi, plutôt, tout ça. Mais voilà, comme il l'a dit, pour répondre à la question, Akira Tozawa est vraiment, vraiment, vraiment un des catcheurs les plus talentueux qu'il ait eu l'occasion d'affronter. Et c'est vrai que la WWE le fait passer dans un rôle beaucoup moins important. Et c'est vrai que maintenant qu'on parle justement de lui, c'est vrai que j'ai pas vu beaucoup de mauvais matchs de sa part. Et comme Simon le dit, ça a été le match, vraiment
Ouais.
le meilleur match déjà qu'il ait pu faire.
Oui, non, mais
Et,
je me doute.
et par contre, comme il a dit, il ne sait pas encore s'il a vraiment une preuve de ce. Enfin, pas une preuve, mais si le match a été quelque part sur un lien YouTube
Ok.
ou autre. Mais voilà, c'est vrai que ouais, il a affronté Akira Tozawa. Ça a d'abord été l'un de ses entraîneurs, l'un de ses tout premiers entraîneurs quand il a commencé à la PCW. Et puis il a eu la chance d'être contre lui dans un match.
Mais c'est bien, tu vois, d'avoir des personnes comme Simon parce que tu vois, au moins, parce que tu vois, c'est un peu comme Ertrous, tu vois. Tu le vois comme un clown
Ouais,
alors que tu sais très bien que
exact.
c'est un
Alors
bon.
qu'en fait, non.
Ouais, voilà. Et du coup,
C'est
pour
exactement,
Akira
ouais.
Tozawa, c'est exactement la même chose. Tu vois que c'est
Ça
un
doit
excellent
être,
catcheur, quoi.
ouais, ça doit être la même chose. Je pense que c'est R-Truth, Akira Tozawa, peut-être encore d'autres
Ouais,
exemples. Ils ont cette carrière qu'ils ne doivent pas, entre guillemets, avoir.
ouais, bien sûr.
Ils méritent certainement d'avoir une meilleure carrière que ça. Après, voilà, on peut forcément penser que ils ont eu, parce qu'R-Truth, je crois qu'il est là depuis à l'époque même de The Rock, hein, fin des
C'est
années
un.
90.
Ouais,
C'est ça, il me
il est là
semble, hein.
depuis. Oh, oui, 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 il est là. Enfin, c'est un meuble, quoi.
Ouais, c'est ça, ouais.
Pour te
Il fait
dire,
partie des meubles.
pour te dire, son catcheur préféré, c'est John Cena, alors qu'il a commencé à vendre John Cena.
Ah ouais, il a commencé bien avant
Tu
John
vois.
Cena. Mais d'ailleurs, John Cena, on a une petite pensée pour lui parce que je crois
Ouais,
qu'il a
ouais,
arrêté
ouais.
sa carrière là,
C'est ça.
au
En
l'année prochaine.
2025, WrestleMania l'année prochaine.
D'accord,
Voilà.
l'an prochain.
Bon,
Et ouais, voilà, donc il aura accumulé 23 ans de carrière, je crois.
c'est
Mais
énorme.
voilà, pour revenir à ce que disait Simon sur Akira Tozawa, il est forcément l'un des tout meilleurs catcheurs qu'il a eu l'occasion d'affronter. Et
Ok.
c'est vrai que ce qu'il a à ce moment à WWE ne reflète pas spécialement ni son talent, ni sa personnalité en dehors du ring.
Je me doutais. Alors, du coup, en 2018, tu débarques du coup du côté de la WWE NXT. Alors, comment ça se passe? Est-ce que tu reçois un mail? Est-ce que c'est un peu comme une sélection habituelle? Par exemple, tu vois, il y en a qui vont au Performance Center, puis ensuite, après,
Tryout et tout.
ouais, voilà, c'est ça. Justement, comment ça se passe un peu cette journée où justement, bah voilà, peut-être que tu es convoqué, peut-être que tu reçois un mail. Explique-nous un petit peu ce fameux jour où tu débarques à la WWE.
So I don't know if it's Wikipedia's information, but I don't think so. You started in WWE NXT in 2018, right?
Yeah.
How WWE did contact you? Was it in an email? Maybe they call you up. Maybe they just invite you, or maybe one of their producers just came to your show. How happened?
So in 2016, I met William Regal on a show in the UK, a really small little show in a place called Mansfield. And at the time, Regal was in the UK and he was coming to a few different UK shows to scout some UK talent. And I think specifically Pete Dunne was one of the guys that he would come to scout. And I don't think I hadn't met Regal by this point, and I don't really think I'd had any sort of like contact with him in the past. And he was at a show that I was on, and I wrestled a guy called Chris Ridgway, and Regal watched the match, and he spent about half an hour after the match giving me feedback, and he was very, very complimentary, but I didn't really think anything of it. And then 2 days later, I was in London for Progress Wrestling, and I wrestled Mark Andrews on the show, and Regal was there again. And
Okay.
before the show started, he took me to one side and offered me a tryout. He said that WWE had tryouts coming up in Glasgow a few months down the line, and offered me a tryout. And about a month later, he emailed me and said that the tryouts were full, but he didn't need me to come to a tryout because he'd already seen me wrestle a few times in person by this point. And he basically said to stay in touch because the plan was to do a second Cruiserweight Classic. They'd already done the first one and had been really successful. and the plan was to do a second one. However, at the time, a British TV company called ITV had contacted a bunch of us because of how hot British wrestling was at the time, and asked us if we would be interested in filming a special called World of Sport Wrestling, with the idea of it becoming a TV series in the UK. So we filmed a special at the end of 2016, and it aired on New Year's Eve at the end of 2016. Around this same sort of time, WWE announced the UK tournament in Blackpool, where Tyler Bate won the UK championship. So I'd signed a contract with ITV for a year, and then WWE UK got announced. So it kind of felt like I'd missed out on WWE because I'd almost like turned them down to do ITV. And about a year later, NXT were doing a run of house shows in the UK, and they were doing a house show at Leeds Arena, which is near where I live. So I emailed William Regal and asked if we could talk whilst he was over in the UK for these house shows. And he rang me that day, and he basically said, there will be something coming in the UK as far as the WWE brand goes. So just keep in touch. And I would occasionally send him matches and stuff like that. And then one afternoon, I was in a hotel in a seaside town called Skegness. And I got an email from one of the Progress management who said that they were in a meeting with Triple H in Orlando at the time, because WWE and Progress had a working relationship. And they asked if I had any photos that they could show Triple H, and they wanted photos of me without the mask. And I'd already had some made because I sent them to Regal at one point the year before. And about a month later, WWE got in touch and offered me a contract for what would eventually become NXT UK. And I had the choice at the time of a contract with ITV that we were being offered, and a contract with WWE that were being offered at the time, which, you know, is a big opportunity, but we didn't know how long the WWE contracts were going to last. We thought that maybe we're just being offered those contracts to stop us signing with ITV, because in the WWE contracts, they could release you after 4 months if they wanted to. Luckily, it turned out okay, and I chose the WWE contract, and I signed with them, and then a couple of months later, NXT UK started.
Ok. Alors, Simon nous dit que ça s'est fait en fait petit à petit, puisque c'était en 2016 où il catchait dans une structure anglaise, et c'est là où il a fait la connaissance de William Regal, puisque William Regal est venu le voir ce soir-là, et William Regal savait que Simon était programmé sur 4 shows dans 4 structures différentes pendant 4 jours. Donc en fait, William Regal s'est présenté à chaque fois pendant ces 4 jours, puisque au fur et à mesure que Simon catchait, en fait, le premier jour, il l'a remarqué. Le deuxième jour, il s'est plus intéressé à lui et a compris qu'il y avait quand même quelque chose à faire. Le troisième jour, il lui a demandé si ça l'intéressait justement de catcher ailleurs et peut-être faire des essais, des tryouts à WWE avec NXT. Et en fait, ça s'est fait ensuite doucement. Ça a pris à peu près un an et demi. Voilà pourquoi après on sait que il avait aussi il a rencontré non seulement William Regal, mais aussi Triple H qui avait fait le déplacement jusqu'en Angleterre. Et voilà, en fait, tout simplement, c'est que il s'est fait remarquer doucement, et il a été directement en contact avec William Regal, mais c'est William Regal qui est venu lui-même le voir, c'est pas l'inverse. Et de là, donc, il a fait les tryouts, il a fait tout ça. Et il dit aussi qu'en fait, il ne savait pas trop quoi choisir, puisqu'il y avait un contrat entre la structure dans laquelle il était qui était plus régulier, et la WWE, NXT à travers la WWE, qui lui proposait qu'un contrat de 90 jours. Donc voilà, il était un petit peu indécis à savoir quelle structure choisir, parce que si on est en contrat avec une structure, on peut pas spécialement être en contrat avec l'autre, quoique ça dépend des structures, elles peuvent s'arranger entre elles. Mais voilà, donc il a pris entre guillemets le risque d'être à la WWE à travers NXT, et comme il le dit, il le regrette pas.
Du coup, je voulais savoir un petit peu, bien sûr, donc de comment ça se fait que tu es un peu, enfin que tu es parti de NXT. Alors, il y a pas mal de choses qui circulent. On en a parlé en off, donc c'est pour ça que je préfère le dire tout de suite. On en a parlé en off. C'est toi qui a accepté, mais apparemment, alors moi, encore une fois, ici, je suis pas juge, tu vois, je suis pas là pour juger les gens. Je m'en contrefous, hein. Moi, je suis juste là pour passer un bon moment, mais je voulais juste savoir, est-ce que c'est à cause de cette accusation qui a fait que tu es parti de la WWE? Tu peux nous en parler un peu de ce fameux départ de NXT, et si tu veux nous parler rapidement de cette affaire, si tu veux bien entendu.
Okay. So next question is, what made you leave WWE? What made you leave NXT? If you really want to answer it, you can. If you don't want, we don't be mad at you. So it's up to you by now.
No, it's fine. I'm very. I mean, this was 4 years ago. So maybe if someone had asked me this question a year or so, or sorry, a couple of years ago or whatnot, I might have been not as comfortable answering it. But you know, it's 4 years ago now. So in 2020, obviously the world was in lockdown, and so we weren't doing any TV shows or anything like that. We weren't doing any tapings or anything. We'd occasionally film a little bit of content at home or something, and NXT UK would show like highlight shows and stuff. But you know, we were all just sat at home and nothing was going on. And in June 2020, some accusations came out about other wrestlers of quite a serious nature. And this opened the floodgates for a series of accusations against a lot of wrestlers, mostly male, the occasional female, but mostly male. And my name got pulled into these accusations. So at the time, when I was with WWE for a lot of the time, I'd had a 4-year relationship and was engaged. Me and my ex-fiance had broken up about a year earlier because I had a lot of personal issues when it came to insecurities and low self-esteem and not feeling good enough about myself and stuff like that. And because of wrestling, I got attention from women because of who I was in wrestling. And because of my own insecurities and because of my own issues, I would seek out attention from women that I thought would give me the attention that I felt that I needed, because I never felt good enough. And in the end, my ex-fiance discovered like messages from girls on my phone, and quite rightly was furious. I never did anything physical, never cheated on her or anything like that, but I would never push away the attention, and I would seek it out because it made me feel better about myself because of how low my self-esteem was. Which is obviously not a justification at all. It's a really shitty thing to do to someone who loved me, and just, you know, someone that I loved, you know, very deeply. And we ended up breaking up because of it. And then, so during 2020, when these allegations were coming out against various people and stuff like that, my name got brought into it by a couple of female wrestlers who I'd been friends with. And again, because of the issues that I had and the constant need I had for validation, had made, you know, flirted with, essentially, or tried to flirt with. And because of my status in wrestling at the time, it got a lot of coverage because I wrestled for WWE at the time. And WWE got in touch with me and basically told me, don't, say anything online, like don't tweet about it, don't try and defend yourself or anything like that. Just leave it and let it, die down.
Okay.
These things always do. But then one allegation got made of a very serious nature, and there was no truth to it whatsoever. It was a complete made-up story. But I said to WWE, like, it's one thing to be accused of like flirting with girls behind my fiance's back, but it's another thing when you bring, serious matters into it, like serious legal matters into it.
Yeah.
So I said, like, I want to make a statement to basically inform the world that there was no truth to this, and they allowed me to do that. But a lot of the comments on Twitter in response to my statement were from people saying, well, what about the other things that you've been, accused of? What about, like, you talking to girls behind your fiance's back and stuff like that? So I put out a second tweet and apologized for making people feel uncomfortable by attempting to flirt with them, and apologized to my fiance for, the way that I'd acted. And because WWE and the wrestling world in general were getting so much like heat at the time, WWE felt like they had to act in some way. And they had told me all week, your job is safe. This sort of thing happens all the time. It'll die down. It'll blow over, whatever. And then when I put the tweet out apologizing for how I'd acted in my relationship and whatnot, WWE saw that as an admission of guilt, and because they felt they needed to do something to show the public that they were dealing with these matters at a professional level. I got a phone call, and they said, the guy who released me, who was like head of talent relations at the time, had said, like, I'd always been a pleasure to deal with and to work with, but unfortunately they were going to have to release me. And the phone call was less than a minute long, and as soon I was sat in a park at the time, and as soon as I saw the phone ring, I knew what was coming. And it was really, really, really fucking difficult. It was, a really, really hard time for me. Like, I'd lost my dream job because of ways that I'd acted, in my personal life. But at the same time, it was a really, really big wake-up call for me as well, that I had all these issues with, like, my self-esteem and, the way I carried myself, that clearly needed dealing with and clearly needed addressing. So, I started therapy a couple of months later, and I didn't make a big deal out of it. I didn't make it, like, public that I was having therapy or anything like that, because I didn't want it to come off as like performative or doing it to just try and get a job back or anything like that. I told a few close friends, and I kept it behind closed doors. I didn't put it on social media or anything like that. I reached out and apologized to people that I felt like I'd affected in a negative way, whilst I was wrestling and stuff like that. And there were some people that I made amends with, and there were some people that never responded, and there were some people that weren't interested in hearing an apology. And that's, I just have to deal with that. And it was a really, really difficult part of my life, but at the same time, it was something that I needed to go through to fix, or to start to fix, the issues that I had that had led me, down that path. So it was a rough, it was a really rough few months, but at the same time, like, it was important that it happened, because it helped me eventually learn how to become a much better person.
Of course, If it was not in that way, maybe it could be more difficult. But I hope you really, really feel better by now, because it's something really bad that happened. And we definitely hope, the dreams to be in WWE or something is not dead. I think you really, really can, and you're really able to do it. We definitely hope that you're going back to NXT to WWE because
Well,
you deserve it. You deserve it, man. Really,
well,
I mean it.
I appreciate. I do appreciate that. I mean, I haven't wrestled, in 3 or 4 years. I'm in contact with people. I spoke to WWE about a year after I got released, and I sent them an email and said, what is the sort of, is this a closed door, or is it, is there a chance in the future? And they said, if it was going to be anything, it wouldn't be for a few years. And the fact is, like, I'm 39. I had a 20-year career and a wonderful one until the last few months. And I'm still in contact with people in wrestling. I've got back in the ring a handful of times. I've done a handful of shows since I got released, but I have a full-time career as a personal trainer. It's something that I'm very passionate about. I love helping people, and that has been really good for me as well, to have that change in my life where the focus isn't on me anymore, and it's helping other people to develop. I still get sent matches from like talent in the UK that want feedback and stuff like that, and I'm that is a rewarding thing to be able to do still, is to to help people to even like a small degree. And I'm not saying I'd never ever get back in the ring again, but at the same time, I feel that wrestling has like moved on without the need for me, and that's fine. I'm very comfortable with that. I'm very at ease with that. I had 2,500 matches, and I got to travel the world and do stuff that I never ever thought I'd get to do. And it's just a shame that I never got the handle on the personal issues I had. But I also think that everything in life happens for a reason. And I guess this is the reason why this happened, is to put me in a different path and just learn to be a different person.
I can understand. Alors, ta question est très simple, mais la réponse est très longue.
Oui, non, mais tu peux faire court, il y a pas de souci.
Je vais essayer de faire court en gardant les grandes lignes.
Ouais, bien sûr.
Si ce sera pas facile, parce que voilà, moi j'ai toutes les informations qu'ils viennent me donner, donc je vais essayer de donner le max d'infos avec le minimum de mots. Alors, Simon nous dit que c'était en 2020, c'est ça, les accusations, tout ça là.
Je crois, ouais, je pense, ouais, je crois que c'est ça.
En fait, tout a commencé en avril-mai 2020, où des accusations de tromperie, puisqu'il était marié à une catcheuse qui était dans le roster de la NXT. Des accusations de tromperie seraient venues parmi certains mariages, justement, et son nom est ressorti par rapport aux accusations, tout ça. Donc, on va quand même rappeler un petit peu. Le contrat qu'il a signé en entrant à la WWE, c'était un contrat spécial, puisqu'il était marié à une personne pendant la signature du contrat. Mais qu'entre-temps, en fait, comme il s'est séparé de la personne, il n'était plus marié à cette même personne-là. En fait, les accusations ont fait qu'il aurait trompé sa femme, alors qu'en fait, pas du tout, puisqu'il était officiellement séparé. Mais comme le contrat n'a pas changé, voilà pourquoi la WWE aurait dit qu'il n'aurait pas respecté sa part du contrat, et ainsi de suite. Voilà pourquoi il a fait qu'il a quitté la WWE, puisque ça a été pour lui une période très, 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 très noire, non seulement sur le plan professionnel, mais aussi sur le plan personnel, puisqu'il a perdu, il a perdu l'un et il a perdu l'autre, bien sûr, par le concours des choses et par le concours de circonstances. Mais voilà, comme il l'a dit, il a bien fait de nous rappeler de nous planter le décor, puisqu'il a signé ce contrat par rapport au mariage alors qu'il était encore marié. Mais entre-temps, il n'était plus marié, il a divorcé de la personne avec laquelle il était marié. Donc voilà pourquoi, en fait, la WWE aurait dit. Après, on pointe personne du doigt, mais il aurait dit éventuellement qu'il n'aurait pas respecté sa part du contrat.
Du coup, tu veux dire qu'il reste encore 4 dernières questions. Justement, s'il peut nous parler l'un de ses meilleurs matchs et l'un de ses pires matchs qu'il a fait jusqu'à maintenant.
Okay. So Simon, we're coming from the end of the interview, unfortunately, but we still have 3 or 4 questions, some few questions that we ask. If you have to choose your best ever match and the worst ever match, what would it be?
So first of all, I should mention as well that my phone battery is running very, very low.
Okay.
So I might have to
Alors,
go.
Dylan, il va falloir essayer d'accélérer parce que, comme il a dit, la batterie de son téléphone est en train de tomber en rade.
Il n'y a pas de souci.
Voilà, on va peut-être supprimer une question ou deux.
Ouais,
donc,
ouais, il n'y a pas de problème. Du coup, 3 alors. Il n'y a pas de souci.
Ok, no problem.
And as well, in all honesty, that's a really impossible question to answer. Like, I couldn't ever. I had so many matches that were important to me for so many reasons that it'd be impossible to just choose like a favorite. Because I said I think I had like 2,500 matches, so to pick one out of all that is like I'd be doing a disservice to all the wonderful people that I got to wrestle throughout my career. I would say that like I don't have like a particular worst match, but I will say that the same week that I wrestled at Royal Albert Hall for WWE, I wrestled in front of 7 people on a farm for a small independent company the same week. So to go from wrestling from this historic building for WWE to wrestling in a barn in front of 7 people was like a real big come down. But again, if I had any bad matches, like which I'm sure I did, I had a lot. They were all still important in some capacity. They're all part of the journey, I guess.
Ok. Alors, Simon nous dit qu'il n'a pas vraiment de top match à mentionner, mais c'est vrai que comme il dit qu'il a fait près de 1000 ou 1500 matchs, donc c'est très très dur de choisir le meilleur match parmi ces 1500. Par contre, il peut nous dire qu'il a fait, pour lui, son pire match, c'était pas un match in-ring, puisqu'en fait, il l'a fait dans une espèce de bar qui était très mal isolé, qui était très mal ventilé, tout ça. Donc, en plus, il y avait je crois qu'il n'y avait même pas 10 personnes. Donc, s'il y a un souvenir à effacer de sa mémoire, ce serait certainement celui-là, parce que ça s'est pas super bien passé au niveau de l'organisation et tout ça. Là, avec son adversaire, ça s'est bien passé, mais au niveau de la structure et tout ça, c'est vrai que comme il le dit, c'était pas vraiment top.
Okay. La question bonus, une autre question, et après c'est fini. Justement, je vais te donner une baguette magique. Quel catcheur souhaiterais-tu affronter si tu avais la possibilité d'affronter un catcheur de ton choix? Ça peut être n'importe qui, un catcheur mort, vivant, enfin bref. Je pense que tu vois de quoi je parle, Osvaldo.
Je vois.
Tu commences à avoir l'habitude, voilà.
So, if we have now a magic wand, if you have to choose an opponent, even if it's dead or alive or something or whatever, who would you face to?
Shawn Michaels, 100%. Always been.
I definitely knew about it.
Shawn Michaels, yeah.
Il dit bien sûr que ça a été la personne qui a vraiment été un référent pour lui. S'il avait une baguette magique et qu'il pourrait affronter quelqu'un, ça serait The Heartbreaker Shawn Michaels.
Ok. Et du coup, la dernière question, qu'est-ce que tu dirais que toi, que le catch t'a apporté jusqu'à maintenant?
So Simon, just the one and last one question. What wrestling did bring to you?
Wrestling gave me 20 years of an amazing life. I got to do things that I never thought I'd get to do. I got to go places that I never thought I'd get to go to. I went to countries that I otherwise probably wouldn't have ever gone to. Despite the end of my career and the issues that got in the way of me carrying on wrestling, I would never, ever look back at my career with any regrets. I achieved more than I ever deserved to because, like I just wanted to have a match on a show. That was the goal for me, was to be able to wrestle in front of an audience and have a match on a show. So to, wrestle for all these amazing companies and to, I have a program upstairs from WrestleMania 35 with my picture in, which is a huge, huge thing. And to go into shops and be able to buy magazines with like pictures of me in, or, to go and buy DVDs from shops with me on, and, to meet all these huge names, to wrestle people that I, watched when I was growing up, like in 2017, I think, 2016, like to wrestle Rey Mysterio, for example, someone that I grew up like, watching, and just, I can't put into words like how much wrestling meant to me, because for 20 years it was everything. It was my entire life. And it was the most wonderful 20 years that I could have asked for.
Alors Simon nous dit que tout simplement le catch lui a apporté 20 de ses meilleures années, qu'il ne regrette absolument rien de rien, même si il a quand même eu des mauvais moments à traverser parmi tout ça. Il dit aussi qu'il ne s'attendait pas à passer autant de temps dans le catch. Il dit aussi qu'il ne pensait pas pouvoir voyager autant, qu'il ne pensait pas pouvoir connaître autant de bonnes personnes que celles qu'il a connues, et que tout simplement il a eu de si belles expériences qu'il ne regrette aucun moment, même les mauvais. Rien que le fait d'être dans un magazine, de pouvoir être à Raw, ça a été quelque chose d'unique pour lui. Et bien sûr, on lui souhaite le meilleur là-dessus.
Bien sûr.
Mais voilà, il ne regrette strictement rien, même les mauvais moments. Donc il a, comme il le dit, merci au catch et merci à toutes les personnes qu'il a croisées.
Voilà. Bah, en tout cas, merci à vous d'avoir suivi cette interview. Merci Osvaldo. Thank you so much, Simon. Puis bah moi, je vous dis à plus tard. Bye tout le monde. Ciao, ciao.